Hey friends, have you ever noticed that we seem pretty obsessed with protein on the internet? Like, how much protein do we actually need? Because there are folks on my feed telling me to eat my body weight in protein, but there's also some dietitian trying to tell people that they should be eating a low protein diet. Or what about plant protein? Is it really as good as animal protein, or are all of us vegans just withering away inside? We're going to talk about all of this and more on this solo episode of the Allsorts Podcast with me, your friendly internet dietitian, Desiree Nielsen. Welcome to Protein 101. We're going to dive deep into the topic, just like we did on our sugar episode, which, if you're into nerdy nutrition stuff and getting behind the internet drama, you're going to love that episode too. Just how nerdy are we talking about? We're going to start by talking about what protein is and how the body uses it, because it's not just for building muscle mass. Shocker. We will outline the basic requirements for protein, as well as the current research on why the basic requirements might not cut it. We're going to talk about the essential amino acids and what the heck a quote unquote complete protein is, as well as whether or not plant protein really is good enough. And of course, we'll make sure we cover practical advice on how to get enough protein over the course of the day so you can feel your best without thinking too much about it. If you're new around here and wondering who the heck I am, I'm a registered dietitian and 3-time best-selling author, including my latest cookbook, Plant Magic. I have well over a decade of experience in gut health, chronic inflammation, and plant-based nutrition. And I started this podcast to foster meaningful conversations about how we take care of ourselves. You can call it wellness, but it's wellness that's actually grounded in science, respectful of traditional medicine, and absolutely, under no circumstances, about restrictive mindsets. Oh, and if this episode stokes your interest in protein, you'll also want to devour our episode 5 on the science of soy and episode 50 on plant-based protein. Sound good? Then let's get started. And as we do, we will start by covering a few fun things I'm currently loving, then shift gears into our Protein 101, and finally, we'll finish up with a community question before we say bye-bye. I also want to give a little warning to listeners that this episode contains protein calculations based on body weights, and if that doesn't work for you, you might want to skip this one. Okay, let's dive in. First up, the things I am very, very into right now, and we need to talk K-dramas. I don't know if you're watching them yet, but I cannot stop. I've been on a plane a lot this year, and when I travel, I need a show that's just for me, aka I don't need to watch with my husband, and I have fallen hard. I started with The Extraordinary Attorney Woo, which I discovered via The Korean Vegan, and now I've watched Celebrity, Queen of Tears, my fave yet, and It's Okay to Not Be Okay. The storylines are all so different, but they all have plenty of great female leads along with humor, romance, and a little emotion. And if you are new to K-dramas, I might start with The Queen of Tears, but also if you already watch them and have new recommendations for me, I am all ears. Number 2 on my list. You know how much I love skincare and how I consume skincare content the way some other people might consume nutrition content. Well, my favorite internet dermatologist, Dr. Samantha Ellis, launched a truly affordable skincare line called Prequel, and I love it so much that I actually signed up for a US Postal Service so I could buy it because it's not available in Canada. It really helped improve my almost permanently irritated skin, and the vitamin C serum is like $27. Even with the US exchange rate, it's much less expensive than most other brands. This is totally not sponsored, as with all of my recommendations here, I am just a super fan. And finally, all of my travels have confirmed just how much I love my backpack. Yep, my backpack. I wanted a good travel backpack for a while now, and last year my family got a backpack for Mother's Day from Monos, a Vancouver company. So I've been using it for about a year, and I just love it so much. It comes in really cute colors. I have a lilac one, and they're made of vegan leather, and they're extremely good quality. Like mine looks brand new still, even though I've been shoving it under the seat in front of me like nonstop. Plus, they have so many pockets. It's big enough for my laptop and my water bottle and my giant headphones, plus books and snacks and all of the stuff that I fly with. Okay, now that we've warmed up with some fun stuff, let's get seriously nerdy about protein. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so let's orient ourselves with the chapters of this mini course, okay? Chapter 1 will be what is protein and what does our body do with the protein we eat. Chapter 2 is understanding essential amino acids and the whole complete protein thing. Chapter 3 is how much protein do we actually need and does that change throughout our lives? And then chapter 4 is how to get enough protein into your day. Okay, chapter 1, here we go. Protein, our current macronutrient crush, the one that can seemingly do no wrong, that we're constantly trying to get more of. But why? What the heck is protein and what is it made of? Proteins are super complex molecules made of one or more chains of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, the same way that sugars are the building blocks of carbohydrates. We'll talk more all about the amino acids in a minute, but let's stick with the proteins themselves for now. Proteins look super cool under the microscope because they look like little knots or tangles, and it's not just random. The way the proteins fold determines their function. There are actually multiple layers of this folding. For example, the amino acid chains can bend or turn, then fold in on themselves, and then multiple amino acid chains can fold in together, which creates the 3D structure of a functional protein. We are going to talk a lot about protein in food, but if you want to understand why we need dietary protein, it's important to know that our body actually makes and uses protein for survival. Dietary proteins provide our body with both the amino acids we need to create our own body's proteins, as well as the energy that is released as the body breaks down the protein itself. Just like carbohydrates, proteins have the energy potential of 4 calories per gram. But what kind of proteins does our body need to make? Why is eating protein so important? It's because we use amino acids for a lot more than you might realize, because the protein conversation is so focused on muscle mass. And yes, muscle is made of protein, but you're probably going to be shocked when you realize how many proteins there are in our bodies, like hormones and hormone carriers. Yep, insulin is a protein. And estrogen is mostly bound to protein carriers, like sex hormone binding globulin. Enzymes are proteins too, and enzymes catalyze all sorts of reactions in the body, from helping you digest fats and proteins, very meta, to neutralizing free radicals as endogenous antioxidant enzymes, to enabling all sorts of cellular reactions like energy production in the cell. Some other, kind of important proteins in the body include antibodies to help you fight infection and hemoglobin to transport oxygen through your bloodstream. Your bones are even built on a protein framework that calcium attaches itself to. In fact, about 50% of the volume or physical space of your bones and roughly 1/3 of the weight of your bones is protein. So, proteins are super cool. And now that we've got the basics of why protein is actually important, even if you're not trying to make major gains in the gym, we can start to tackle the finer points of protein, like amino acids. Now, I mentioned that amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and there are a bunch of amino acids found in nature, but the human body only uses 20 of them. Amino acids are classified as essential or non-essential. Non-essential meaning that the body can make them itself because we are a living, breathing protein factory. And essential meaning that our body needs to consume them because we can't build them ourselves. For transparency, there are also conditionally essential amino acids, meaning that in certain circumstances, our body also needs to get those from food. But that's a little too niche for this discussion because you do not have all day to listen to me talk proteins. We are going to get into some juicy territory here because there is so much misinformation and disinformation and just like so much information in general about amino acids and complete protein. But I want to start by making something perfectly clear right now. It doesn't matter which proteins you eat. Your digestive tract breaks the proteins down into their amino acids that your body then reassembles into the protein it needs for survival. I feel like I've got to say that again, maybe with a little more detail this time so it really sinks in. When we eat food that contains protein, our digestive system breaks the protein down. For example, In the stomach, it churns the food with strong stomach acid to unfold the complex protein structure. We call this denaturing. And our stomach cells also release something called pepsin, which is a protease or a protein digesting enzyme. Pepsin starts to break down the bonds in the protein into peptides or small amino acid chains. So the protein enzymes in our small intestine can get at them and then transport the resulting amino acids and peptides into our bodies. Our bodies get these amino acids from the proteins we eat. And there are 9 essential amino acids, the ones we must eat. These are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. Okay, I feel like I'm back at university right now because I honestly don't think I've listed all of the essential amino acids since then. And you definitely don't need to memorize them, but you do need to understand that they exist and that they're important because it will help you understand why some people say proteins are complete or incomplete. Traditionally, we call a protein complete when it has all 9 of the essential amino acids in non-limiting, aka larger, amounts. The idea being, if we had only one food to eat, a complete protein would ensure we don't die. Which proteins are deemed complete by traditional standards? All animal proteins except collagen. Yes, you heard that right, except collagen. And a few plant-based ones too, like soy, quinoa, and hemp hearts. Based on what I've just said, eating a complete protein seems important, yes? Except that until recently, our very narrow vision of protein neglected to acknowledge that if we are lucky enough to have enough food to eat, most of us aren't existing on just one food. For example, if all we have to eat is cassava root, then we could potentially end up with some dangerous amino acid deficiencies. However, if we have peanuts and rice and chickpeas and soy milk to eat, we will never be at risk of essential amino acid deficiency as long as we're eating all 4 of those foods in adequate amounts to meet our energy needs. And here's the take home. Your body has no idea whether the amino acids it got came from animal or plant foods. All your body cares is that it got them. Oh, and that all plant foods contain all of the essential amino acids. I'll say it again. All plant foods, from lentils to green peas to pasta, contain all of the essential amino acids. What's the catch? Almost none. If you are the average person with enough to eat, eating a variety of foods every day, providing adequate protein, you will be fine. And if this seems very counter to what folks are saying on the internet, there are 2 reasons for that. 1, that they're wrong, and 2, that there is, of course, a bit more nuance here. There always is. It's nutrition. The first oh-so-nuanced factoid is that plant proteins can be less concentrated than animal proteins, but not always. For example, a half cup of tempeh has 16 grams of protein. That's quite close to animal proteins like tuna, which contains about 16 grams of protein per half cup. So to get adequate amounts of protein from exclusively plant foods, you need to A, be eating more of those concentrated protein foods like soy, and or B, eating a higher volume of food in general. We'll come back to these practical tips later in the pod. The second zone of nuance is that if you have different health states or goals, you may have different protein needs. For example, someone undergoing cancer treatment may be put on a high-calorie, high-protein diet to support it. That's between you and your oncology dietitian. Or maybe you're an Olympic powerlifter. That is a whole other thing. But then there are those of us who are just trying to be well. Like we're not athletes, but we're active and we're trying to stay healthy as we age. And that's quite different from those of us who are actively trying to gain significant muscle mass. And you want to make sure that you're getting enough of those essential amino acids to make those gains. In this specific case, a bit of extra focus on essential amino acids, in particular the amino acid lysine, will be important. But all that means, if we're talking about plant-based proteins in particular, is adding more lysine-rich plant foods like soy, legumes, cashews, pumpkin seeds and quinoa into your rotation. Lysine is critical for collagen production and bone health too. So if you're not replacing animal proteins with plant proteins and just eating a lot of grain foods, you might not be getting enough. But let's be clear. If you are not worried about adding significant muscle mass, the advice to simply eat a wide variety of plant foods is more than enough, and I've got tips to ensure you do later on in the episode. Which is important to state here, because many health professionals still advise us to combine plant proteins to make a quote unquote complete protein plate, aka pair a lysine rich food like lentils with a methionine rich food like rice. And while that is how most of us eat most of the time, I'm not just heaping lentils or rice onto my plate as a mono meal. It's also not something we need to be rigid about. Why? Because we are going to eat a variety of foods containing a variety of amino acids over the course of the day, which our body will add to our amino acid pool for protein production. Yeah, there is the nuance. Our body doesn't waste the amino acids we get at dinner because there was slightly less lysine in a meal. The amino acids from lunch are still roaming around our body at dinner, and our body will combine them as it needs for metabolism. Eat enough and eat enough protein, and you're good. And the research supports this, which means this is a good time to get into how much protein we actually need, because there's a whole lot of nuance here too. Hence all the mixed messages we see from the vegans who say that all foods have protein and are telling you that you need a lot less protein than you think, to all the fitness influencers telling folks they need 130 grams of protein every day or you'll wither away. So before we get into the actual national requirement for protein, let's talk about how we're generally doing on protein as a population. According to 2015-2016 data from the US National Survey called NHANES, the average American is consuming about 16% of their calories from protein, which is within the recommended range. This equates to about 97 grams of protein daily for men and 69 grams of protein daily for women. What about us vegans? Studies such as the Nutrinet Santé and Epic Oxford suggest that some vegans aren't getting enough. But on average, protein intakes are, 62 to 64 grams a day and roughly 12 to 14% of calories. And honestly, it is fine, but it's not fantastic. But not because it's not totally doable. It could be that they aren't eating enough in general, or maybe they're focused on ethics and not nutrition. And to be clear, amino acid deficiency in this group is still almost unheard of. So, knowing how much we eat on average, what are our actual protein needs? The basic protein requirement that we're taught in school, which is the same in the US and Canada, is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So a 175-pound body would require about 63 grams of protein to maintain basic metabolic function and avoid deficiencies. By that measure, even the vegans are doing A-okay. But I'm going to guess that if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably less interested in just avoiding deficiency. And in our practice, we typically recommend a slightly higher amount to support basic activity levels, immune function, and take advantage of the functional benefits of protein, like feeling full and satisfied at a meal, and helping to keep blood sugars and energy levels stable in between meals. When we consume protein, along with fiber and fat, it helps to slow down stomach emptying and the rate at which nutrients hit our bloodstream. If you've heard of people talking about satiety or elongating the blood sugar curve, yep, protein can do that. For that reason, in our practice, we recommend 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. So, for a 175-pound person, that would be closer to 87 grams of protein. More, but nowhere near the 100 to 130 grams that seems to be this weird blanket recommendation right now. Does the research support our practice-based advice? It does. For the average person, relatively sedentary but working out, like do a desk job, but you go to the gym 3 times a week, the research suggests that around 1.1 grams per kilo or 0.5 grams per pound is a better estimate of daily requirements. And for our elders, it would seem that 1 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilo will help them reduce risk of muscle loss, which leads to reduced quality of life as we get older. What about those of us who are actively trying to put on muscle mass, such as those in athletic training or those of us at a stage of life like the menopause transition, where adding muscle mass is going to have all sorts of health benefits? Right now, it would appear that if building and maintaining muscle mass is a priority, that 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram is a sweet spot. How does that net out? 95 to 127 grams for that 175-pound person, which is interestingly closer to that internet recommendation. But remember, that's when you're actively trying to gain muscle mass. And if you weigh something different, that number is different. If you weigh 150 pounds, for example, that range would be 81 to 109 grams. I'm going to link a really helpful handout from the American College of Sports Medicine in the show notes if you have more questions around protein timing and dose for muscle maintenance in athletics, because athletics is a whole different conversation. And what about if you're 100% plant-based? For those of us on a plant-based diet, because of the potential lower bioavailability of plant proteins, all that fiber, the recommendation might be a little bit higher, yes? Except that in the research, it would appear that if you hit like 1.4 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo, your muscle building capacity will be equivalent to eating animal proteins. What the research shows us is that the small reduction in bioavailability of plant proteins is more than adequately compensated by just eating a wee bit more protein, like maybe 10%. And it's super easy to do, which we'll get to next. Now, I want us all to take a deep exhale here. I just talked a lot of numbers, which honestly is not always my favorite, but I did so for a couple of reasons. The first is that when it comes to protein, all we hear on the internet is numbers, and I want to place them in context of the science. The second is that I want everyone listening to feel confident that I am fully aware of the science behind adequate protein for muscle mass, so that when I tell everyone else that you really don't have to be so worried about protein, you know that I know exactly what you need should you actually be worried about it. As a dietitian with a positive nutrition focus, it can be easy to dismiss advice as non-evidence-based or not as effective if we don't talk numbers. But in this next section, I'm going to show you how seemingly oversimplified advice actually tracks the science. I want to add a little note here about life stage before we dive into the practical advice, because we've just finished up a little mini series on hormone health on the pod. Definitely check it out if you're the owner of a pair of ovaries, because as we get older, our energy needs do start to decrease. And we see body composition changes that make increased muscle mass all the more important. If that's you, check out episode 72 with Barbie Bowles RD. Spoiler alert, the number is 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo, but we get into way more detail about what getting that much protein looks like if energy balance and weight is a focus for you. And I already mentioned that in our elders, ensuring 1 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilo might really be beneficial to maintain our muscle mass. As appetite decreases, it's incredibly common to see elders who are under eating and develop weakness due to inadequate protein intake, and it's so avoidable. So now is the point in the pod where we're so full up on theory that now we've got to talk about how to actually get enough protein into our everyday lives. Because we are hot off the heels of all of this numbers talk, this is the point where an influencer would then sell you on nothing but cottage cheese, chicken breast, and protein powders because protein. But I'm vegan and a dietitian. So I'm here to tell you that protein doesn't always look like what you think it does. For example, protein is not synonymous with animal foods like we think it is. I've seen folks say that someone eating pasta and chickpeas doesn't have any protein on their plate, which couldn't be further from the truth because that meal likely has about 25 grams of the stuff. The truth about protein is that you have to be mindful, but not obsessive. This is where I come back to the most boring of dietitian recommendations that by now you'll hopefully see is grounded in some pretty complex science. Yep, it's my friend, the plate method, where you try to craft most plates with 50% fruits and vegetables, 25% protein-rich food, and 25% whole grains or starchy veg. No, it is not enough to sprinkle some quinoa on your salad and call it protein, or say you've got protein in your almond milk smoothie because you added a spoonful of peanut butter. You've got to understand which foods are concentrated in protein and which ones fall into the helpful booster category. For example, in the animal world, this is easy. You know the drill, so I won't cover it beyond reminding you that like a deck of cards size portion, aka 3 to 4 ounces of animal protein, is going to be about 20-25 grams of protein. Here, I want to focus on plant proteins because, like I said, I'm plant-based, but it's also the type of protein that people are most confused about. And I said at the top of the pod that a half a cup of tempeh has 16 grams of protein. I'm going to lead with soy because it's incredibly nutritious and protein rich, and folks are not eating enough soy. A half cup of extra firm tofu has 10 grams of protein. A half cup of edamame has 12 grams. Doesn't seem like enough? Well, you can absolutely eat more. A half block of tofu is not a huge amount of food, and it has about 30 grams of protein, like a chicken breast. And if you're still a soy skeptic, episode 5 on the science of soy should help with that. Next, we have the legumes, which, depending on your fiber tolerance, might not be enough protein all on their own. 3/4 of a cup of beans or lentils have about 10 to 13 grams, which is a lot of legumes for someone who is not fiber ready. A little mention for hemp hearts here too, which at 3.5 grams of protein per tablespoon are pretty close to meat. It's just that you're not going to eat a half a cup of them at one meal. So they're a booster, not a mainstay. But now is a good time to remind you that we don't have to eat one food, all your protein when it comes to like, how do we get protein? Oh, one food needs to give me everything that I need. Well, no, that's not how it works. For example, you can take 2 foods that aren't considered high in protein, say sprouted grain bread and peanut butter. And if you eat 2 slices of that bread with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, all of a sudden you've got about 18 grams of protein. Surprising, right? Or if you swap oat milk for soy milk, you're now getting 7 to 8 grams of protein per glass, aka an egg's worth of protein in your latte. Snacking on a 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds mid-morning will net you a surprising 11 grams. See how this adds up? You don't have to get weird about it. You just need to seek out protein-rich foods when you eat. And if you really want me to show you how protein-rich plants can be, let's create a meal with 40 grams of protein, shall we? It's more than I need at one meal, but maybe that's what you need. Let's start by roasting up a half package of tofu, which nets you 30 grams. Let's add a cup of cooked pasta, which adds another 9 grams. Yep, even plain wheat pasta has protein. Let's add a cup of broccoli to the mix, which is 2.5 grams of protein. Wait, there you go. Over 40 grams and not even a huge amount of food, because that is another common concern when it comes to plants. Okay, should we do one more? Let's make a salad with a half a cup of lentils, that's 9 grams, a 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds, 11 grams, 2 cups of raw kale, 6 grams, a Caesar dressing with 2 tablespoons of hemp hearts, 7 grams, and a glass of soy milk, 8 grams. That is 41 grams of protein in a salad. Now that you see that it can be done, exactly how much do you need and how do you make sure you get it? I definitely do not recommend living your life tracking. It's not necessary for most of us, Olympic athletes aside, and it's also deeply triggering for those of us with dieting pasts. Instead, you can choose to A, live your life by the plate method, including a high protein food at each meal, with other foods that make up the difference for a completely tracking-free way of life. Or if you want to go a little deeper because you suspect you could be doing better by protein, here is what you do. If you know your weight, you can do the basic calculation divided in 2 for an average minimum protein target, and then think about what that looks like divided between 3 meals and 1 to 3 snacks a day. 90 grams of protein a day could be around 25 at each meal and 15 grams in a snack. Think about the foods you eat daily and learn their protein content. I have a great post on Powerhouse Proteins on my blog, which I'll link in the show notes, or you can track for 2 to 3 days max on an app like Chronometer. If that amount of protein doesn't feel like enough, like that basic calculation, see how bumping it up to 1.2 or 1.3 grams of protein per kilo works. To do that, remember you have to divide your weight in pounds by 2.2 to get kilograms. But I need to repeat, you don't need to track your protein if you're the average person just living. The way people talk about nutrition online, they make it seem like your head will explode if you don't hit your target every day, which couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that our body is super resilient and our appetite, energy needs, and metabolic state change from day to day. An occasional nutrition check in from time to time, maybe once a year, is more than adequate. Maybe focus up on protein after a vacation where you know you've been eating mostly starchy stuff. Or maybe you track protein for a few days if you find yourself hungry all the time or extra sore from your workouts. The best option, of course, would be to take those journals to a dietitian who can personalize your advice, but I totally get that not all of us have access to that. Okay. Whew, that was a lot. And I feel like there were so many other topics we could have explored. But like I said, we talk a lot about protein quality in episode 5 and other more global recommendations around plant-based protein specifically in episode 50. So those are definitely ones to check out. Before we say goodbye, let's go to a community. Well, I mean, more honestly, it's like a bunch of community questions sort of lumped into one because it was really tough to choose. There were so many of them, but in the end, the majority rules. So let's start by talking protein powder. There were a bunch of questions around this, so I'll do a little tour and try and answer a bunch. Many of you asked for my specific recommendations, so before I offer them, I'll say this. Protein powders are so individual because you might have texture or flavor preferences that are different than mine. I haven't tried a ton for the simple reason that I would hate to waste 50 or 60 bucks on a protein that I hate. So now that I've found ones that I like, I don't really stray. So if you have something amazing that you love, be sure to let me know. The ones that I like best are the Vanilla Perfect Protein from Botanica for my Canadian friends, because I really don't think it's available in the US, and the Vega Sport Premium Protein, available in both the US and Canada. But I also have to put in a mention for OWYN, which is OWYN. It's an actually delicious protein drink available in the US that is super high in protein. It is so, so good. No chalkiness, no weird flavor. I honestly don't know how they do it. I like stock up when I'm in the States and bring it home in my suitcase. So now that we've got recommendation out of the way, someone asked about whether protein powders are complete and whether that is important. So a little refresher. It's not essential to have a quote unquote complete protein powder, but in fact, most of them are. And if you're paying for supplemental protein, like why not? Soy protein will be on its own. Whey is, of course, if that is what you use. And the two that I recommended are blended for complete amino acid composition. And yes, you can absolutely give a protein powder to kids as long as it is all protein with no added vitamins, minerals, or herbs or extras, because the protein itself is simply food. Finally, someone asked about protein powders and bloat. I'm going to link to an article I contributed to in the show notes on this very topic, but here's the Coles Notes version. It's complicated. I mean, of course it is, right? But there could be a number of reasons. For example, you're now adding 20 to 30 grams of protein to an already nutrient-dense smoothie, so it will slow down your digestion of it. It's part of why we like protein at a meal. It helps slow down digestion and absorption for longer lasting energy. If you're trying to knock back that smoothie in 5 minutes, you're creating a stomach bottleneck that could lead to a major bloating sensation. There are many of other reasons why this may or may not occur, and you can check out the article for the rest. Okay, friends. Whew, there you have it. Protein 101. Love the nerdy nutrition stuff? I know I do. Go back and check out my other solo nutrition episodes on sugar and inflammation, which was the top episode on Spotify last year. And be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Allsorts Podcast, which is produced by myself and edited by Brian McCalman. We are grateful to live and work on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Until next time, friends, be well.